Stories that time forgot.
There are mistakes paid for with an apology, and others paid for with the fall of an empire, all because someone didn't turn the page in time. The billion-dollar contract signed without being read. New York City, 2005. What you're about to hear today is the ultimate proof that, in the high corridors of power, a split second of distraction or a lapse into overconfidence can be more lethal than a market crash. Stick around until the end, because what you are about to discover will completely reshape your view of this channel as Engineering of Deception and Grand Fraud series, proving that the architecture of disaster sometimes only requires a quick signature on a paper nobody bothered to review. Imagine the air on the 50th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper is so thick you can almost chew it. The clatter of keyboards and the low hum of televisions tuned to financial news create a constant white noise. You're a senior executive at one of the world's most aggressive investment firms, and on your glass desk sits a 300-page stack of legal documents. It's 6:00 p.m. You have an important dinner to get to, and your lawyer assures you it's just the usual standard boilerplate. Have you ever wondered what your time is actually worth? For the players in this story, that 1 minute of rushing was worth exactly $1 billion. It was the scent of success and the rush to close the deal that blinded them to a termination clause hidden, like a bear trap, on page 244. As we've analyzed in other cases within the Engineering of Deception and Grand Fraud section of Stories Time Forgot, the engineering of an error is often more effective than direct theft. In this case, there were no guns or hackers, but a team of lawyers using technical jargon so dense it would make any reader's eyes glaze over from sheer exhaustion. But in a footnote drafted with masterclass ambiguity, every letter of that clause was a projectile aimed straight at the heart of the company's treasury, moving capital through the international financial messaging system toward tax havens before anyone could say stop. If you could step into the audit room weeks later, the vibe would be radically different. The glare of the halogen lights now feels like a police interrogation. The man at the center of this collapse, someone used to giving orders and being obeyed, watches as his name starts appearing in internal reports, not as a leader, but as the person responsible for the biggest accounting black hole of the decade. The first act of this corporate tragedy ends when the chief financial officer discovers the company no longer has the liquidity to cover next month's payroll. But what follows is a free fall into the abyss, because you'll discover that the contract didn't just cost money. It handed over control of the firm as most valuable patents to its biggest competitor for the price of a cup of coffee. How would you feel if you woke up to find that the company you spent 20 years building no longer belongs to you because you accepted an addendum you never even saw? The second act is a race against the clock in the Delaware courts. Shareholder pressure is suffocating, with calls coming in at all hours demanding heads on platters. The same employees who used to greet you with respect now avoid your gaze in the elevator. The sensory atmosphere shifts from the comfort of silk upholstery to the cold steel of the courtroom and the sharp crack of the judge's gavel. The opposing counsel smiles with absolute coldness. They knew exactly what they were doing when they drafted those 4 lines buried in a sea of technicalities. At this point in the story, the suspense hits its peak when it's revealed that the signature wasn't just an oversight, but that there was an inside hand that facilitated the error in exchange for a golden parachute in the Cayman Islands. The paradox is that the company's internal controls were so rigid that nobody imagined the failure would come from the very top. This technique of exploiting decision fatigue to slip in unacceptable conditions is the same one we'll see in our next episode, when we analyze the forged will that divided Europe, where we'll learn that a single misplaced word can redraw the map of an entire continent. The third act is the moment of total liquidation. The day after the scandal went public, shares plummeted 40% in just 3 hours. The sound of printers spitting out mass layoff notices was the only echo left in offices that once buzzed with ambition. The International Financial Messaging System recorded the exit of the final assets, while court experts sealed the files. In the end, there was no trial for fraud because, technically, everything was legal. The contract was signed. And the law protects the freedom to contract, even if one party chooses not to read what they're signing. However, the end of this story is what will really make you reflect on the fragility of our legal security. Although the executive was fired without severance, the money never returned. $1 billion vanished into a web of legally established shell companies thanks to that cursed contract. They managed to prove that the greatest vulnerability of any system isn't software or physical security, but the human hubris of believing we read too smart to be fooled by a piece of paper. The company ended up being absorbed for a fraction of its original value, disappearing forever from the stock indices. Before we wrap up, I have to tell you that the next case we'll unearth in this engineering of deception and grand fraud section is just as shocking. The forged will that divided Europe. We'll all see how a signature on a deathbed sparked a legal and political war that lasted decades and changed the fate of 3 nations. You cannot miss it if you want to understand how far ambition can go when it meets a pen and a blank sheet of paper. Now that you know the story of the most expensive signature of all time, I ask you, do you think the responsibility lies 100% with the person who signs without reading? Or do you think the law should more harshly punish those who draft contracts specifically designed to deceive? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective is essential to completing this puzzle of history. Subscribe so the system notifies you when we unearth the next piece of the puzzle in Stories Time Forgot. Your support is what allows us to keep investigating these truths that those in power tried to erase forever. See you in the next section of our library of secrets. Sometimes, the greatest scam isn't a robbery, but a well-executed distraction. Has it ever happened to you that you've accepted terms and conditions online without reading a single word? Think twice before you click accept again. Tell me about your experience down in the comments.